Before becoming a well-known figure on social media, Ruby Franke lived a seemingly ordinary life alongside her husband, Kevin Franke. The two met while still young, during their college years in Utah, and soon began building a life together based on conservative religious values and a strong sense of family. Kevin was a university professor in the field of civil engineering, known for his more reserved and analytical personality. Ruby, on the other hand, chose to fully dedicate herself to motherhood, taking on the central role in raising and caring for the children. Over the years, they had 6 children: Shari, Chad, Abby, Julie, Russell, and Eve, each with a distinct personality that would later spark curiosity among followers. The household dynamic was marked by strict organization, an intense routine, and a parenting style based on discipline, responsibility, and early autonomy. For Ruby, the mission was to raise adults who were prepared to face life's challenges with maturity from an early age. Kevin, although appearing less frequently in videos, was clearly a supportive figure and contributed to important decisions. The couple placed great value on structure, order, and clearly defined roles within the family. And it was precisely this solid, united, and seemingly exemplary structure that attracted the interest of thousands of people when they decided to share their routine on YouTube. In 2015, Ruby Franke decided to turn her family's routine into online content. This marked the birth of the 8 Passengers channel, a project that, at first glance, seemed like just another way to document family memories and share everyday experience. But what began as simple and spontaneous videos quickly grew far beyond what she imagined. With cameras rolling during breakfast, car rides, schoolwork, punishments, and leisure time, the channel aimed to show everything unfiltered. And this everything became the main draw. Viewers didn't just watch, they felt like part of the family. Within a few months, the subscriber count skyrocketed, and Ruby became one of the most popular figures in the niche known as family vloggers. The format was straightforward, near-daily videos, homemade editing, and high level of exposure. The children were the protagonists, and the audience closely followed their routines, lessons, conflicts, and even punishment. It was like a family reality show with a strong emotional and maternal appeal, which many people related to. At the same time, this constant exposure began to raise questions. Was it healthy to show the children's private lives so frequently? Was there genuine consent for that? What was the psychological impact of this level of visibility from such a young age? These doubts began to be debated among followers and critics on the platform. Even so, the success was undeniable. The channel surpassed 2 million subscribers and amassed tens of millions. As it grew, Ruby fully committed to the channel, turning content creation into her main source of income. Monetization included ads, partnerships with children's and household product brands, as well as promotions for courses and family events. With more resources, the channel gained a more polished aesthetic, better sound and image quality, and an even stricter publishing schedule. The dedication increased, and so did the audience's expectations. However, over time, some decisions shown in the videos began to cause discomfort. Situations such as depriving the children of meals as a form of punishment, harsh public corrections, and extremely strict rules drew attention and became targets of criticism. Many began to view the channel as excessively authoritarian. Even in the face of criticism, Ruby insisted she was merely practicing responsible parenting with firm principles. According to her, it was a purposeful way to educate, something she believed was being lost in other families. But for many viewers, the content began to cross the line, and this discomfort would only grow over time. As time passed, the intense exposure of family life on the 8 Passengers channel went from charming to uncomfortable for part of the audience. Ruby's parenting decisions began to spark heated debate, and it wasn't hard to understand why. Among the most talked about episodes was the moment when Ruby revealed she had taken away one of her children's lunch as punishment for misbehaving at school. The phrase, "he's going without food today," generated thousands of comments and spread to other platforms. The case became a symbol of what many saw as excessive. Another controversial episode involved Chad, one of the sons, receiving prolonged punishment. In videos, Ruby mentioned that he had slept on a beanbag for several months after losing his room as punishment. Many viewers questioned the proportionality of this measure and whether it exceeded acceptable limits. Furthermore, extremely strict rules regarding the use of technology drew attention. The children had limited access to electronic devices, and Ruby made it clear she controlled every aspect of their online consumption. The justification was to protect the children from external influences, but to many, the practice sounded like extreme surveillance. These decisions, which to Ruby were examples of firm and purposeful parenting, began to be seen as excessive, even harmful, by a growing portion of the audience. Influencers, psychologists, and parents began publicly commenting on the methods shown on the channel, further fueling the debate. On social media, opinions were divided. Some followers defended Ruby, saying she was simply applying traditional parenting focused on limits and responsibility. Others, however, argued that the line between discipline and emotional abuse was crossed, and that it was important to recognize when a child's well-being could be at risk. Even so, Ruby remained firm, reinforcing her stance in videos and responding to criticism with conviction. For her, it was better to be judged for being too strict than to neglect her children's development. But the scenario was changing. What had once been just discomfort for some of the audience began to raise real red flags. And the actions inside the Franke household would go from controversial to the subject of actual investigations. As the channel's controversial episodes piled up, criticism intensified. Ruby Franke, once celebrated for her authenticity and firmness, came to be seen by many as authoritarian, inflexible, and even insensitive. But instead of backing down or changing the style of the content, she decided to confront the negative comment head-on. In later videos, Ruby began responding to the criticism openly. She claimed that many of those commenting didn't understand her values, that her parenting style wasn't abusive, and that she was convinced she was raising her children with love and responsibility. To her, the backlash stemmed from a society growing increasingly permissive, where setting boundaries was confused with oppression. This narrative began to take on a more philosophical tone when Ruby aligned herself with Jodi Hildebrand, a professional in the emotional wellness field and founder of an organization called Connections. Together, they began promoting a philosophy of personal development based on responsibility, truth, emotional control, and strict boundary. Ruby began appearing more frequently alongside Jodi in videos discussing behavior, parenting, spirituality, and even sexuality. The videos tackled heavy topics, often with a moralistic and absolutist tone. The language became more technical, with an emphasis on terms like emotional honesty, authenticity, and spiritual disconnection. This shift in content divided the audience even further. While some identified with the proposal of inner growth and emotional discipline, others saw it as an attempt to justify rigid and controversial behavior with a facade of professionalism and spirituality. In addition, Jodi's presence made some people uncomfortable due to the assertive and inflexible tone with which she addressed delicate issues. Many reported that the content felt controlling, with extreme religious and behavioral interpretations. For some viewers, the channel had stopped being a representation of family life and had become a platform for ideological indoctrination. Ruby, in turn, seemed increasingly convinced she was on a mission. In one video, she even said it was better to be hated for telling the truth than to be loved for feeding illusion. This firm stance appealed to a segment of the audience that saw her as a strong figure, but it alienated many former followers who had once seen the channel as a space for lighthearted family identification. Social media, especially TikTok and Reddit, became hotspots for heated debate. Critical commentary channels began producing videos dissecting Ruby's behavior, raising ethical and even legal questions about the parenting displayed. Hashtags with her name started trending, and although Ruby and Jodi didn't directly respond to external analysis, it was clear that the influencer's public image was changing. This process wasn't immediate, but it was steady. The public's perception of Ruby shifted from being mostly positive to becoming an ideological battleground. On one side, those who saw a brave mother standing up to modern criticism of discipline. On the other, those who saw signs of emotional abuse and excessive control disguised as. Meanwhile, the children's lives, still exposed in the video, continued to be closely followed. And although the warning signs were becoming more evident, few imagined that the family's problems would soon go beyond the screen and reach the judicial. The partnership between Ruby Franke and Jodi Hildebrand marked a significant shift in how the channel's content began to be perceived. Jodi, founder of the Connections organization, was already known for her strict approach to emotional wellness, family discipline, and spirituality. By joining forces with Ruby, she brought a new narrative to the channel, more theoretical, more intense, and also more polarized. Their proposal was clear: to promote a personal development project based on emotional responsibility, integrity, moral structure, and connection to universal principles. The audience was introduced to concepts like chosen emotional distancing, natural consequences, and radical honesty. The language took on a more technical and authoritative tone, with less room for family spontaneity and more focus on detailed explanations of conduct. Ruby embraced this new role with conviction. She began recording videos with a more instructional tone, often analyzing situations in her own home through the lens of the doctrine she now followed. The children continued to appear, but the focus shifted to their behavior as case studies within the lessons being taught, as if they were living examples of the discussed concepts. Even disciplinary moments were presented as illustrations of higher principles. The partnership with Jody also expanded beyond youth. The two began offering online courses, paid live streams, exclusive educational materials, and counseling sessions. Their message was one of empowering parents, correcting emotional imbalances, restoring family order, and reconnecting individuals with universal truth. To them, this was a mission with spiritual purpose. To critics, it was a rigid, inflexible method, often punitive and with no room for individuality or personal. The duo's popularity grew, but so did the question. What had once been a simple family vlog was, to many, an ideological platform with real influence and possibly emotional manipulation. What was once merely a digital controversy took a far more serious turn when one of Ruby Franke's children sought help outside the home. The episode occurred discreetly, but immediately caught the attention of local authority. The child, visibly thin, dehydrated, and bearing physical marks, reported experiencing severe punishments, prolonged food deprivation, forced isolation. The testimony was enough to trigger emergency action. Authorities in Utah, the state where the family lived, launched a formal investigation. Upon visiting the reported location, they found not only the child who had escaped seeking help, but also another child in similarly troubling condition. Both were immediately taken for medical care. Initial clinical assessments confirmed consistent signs of neglect and abuse, which underscored the severity of the situation. The house where the children were found was connected to Jody Hildebrandt's workplace, which immediately placed the partnership between her and Ruby under a new spotlight. Old videos showed Ruby at that same location, interacting with the children days before the incident, raising suspicions about their direct involvement in the decisions that led to those. The public reaction was immediate. The case gained traction in local media, then statewide, and quickly became a national story. Longtime followers of the channel spoke out on social media, expressing shock, anger, and disappointment. What was once seen by some as strict discipline now appeared to be reevaluated as an abusive and alarming pattern. Authorities continued gathering evidence, reviewing old videos, and Ruby Franke became formally investigated on suspicions of neglect, abuse, and child endangerment. The situation had gone far beyond the internet. Now, the physical and emotional well-being of the children was at the center of a judicial process. With the official launch of the investigation, the case involving Ruby Franke took on even greater proportions. The charges were now being thoroughly examined by Utah authorities, and the findings by legal teams indicated this was not an isolated incident, but rather a behavioral pattern that may have continued for months or even years. The younger children were immediately removed from the custody of their parents, while social workers and psychologists began assessing the family's history and the potential emotional damage suffered by the children. Preliminary reports shocked even professionals experienced with family neglect cases. According to court documents, the children showed signs of malnutrition, excessive punishment, isolation, and physical restrictions. One of the children said they had lost access to their own room as a disciplinary measure and had to sleep in a sleeping bag on the floor for weeks. Another reported spending hours without being allowed to speak to siblings or use the bathroom freely, depending on direct permission from their mother or Jody Hill. These revelations made headlines and entered the courtroom. Prosecutors filed formal charges against Ruby Franke and Jody, including neglect, child abuse, and failure to provide basic care. Both initially denied the accusations, but chose to remain legally silent during preliminary hearings, raising further speculation about their defense strategy. Old channel videos began to be used as part of the investigation. Situations that had once seemed like ordinary family routines were now being reevaluated under a new lens, that of legal evidence. Many viewers wondered how no one had noticed the signs earlier. In fact, in 2020, Child Protective Services had already been contacted following reports from concerned viewers. At the time, authorities visited the family's home but chose not to take legal action, a decision now widely criticized. Ruby's defense claimed she was a caring mother who had been misunderstood. Prosecutors, however, emphasized the consistent pattern of decisions that endangered the physical and psychological well-being. Public opinion became even more polarized, with heated debates over the limits of parental authority and the role of the state in child protection. Amid all of this, Kevin Franke, previously more discreet, began to speak out. In a statement to the press, he said he was cooperating with the investigation and confirmed that he had been separated from Ruby during the time of the most serious. This revelation surprised some of the public, who had believed the couple was still together. Kevin also stated that he was focused on providing emotional support for the children. Tensions grew with each hearing, as new details emerged and the likelihood of a conviction became more tangible. The story that began with family lunches and homework videos was now unfolding through legal documents, courtroom proceedings, and emotional testimony. With the case gaining national attention, the impact on Ruby Franke's public image was devastating. On social media, the reaction was swift. Hashtags like #JusticeForTheFranke and #RubyFranke went viral, generating millions of views in videos analyzing old clips from the 8 Passengers channel. Influencers, psychologists, former fans, and journalists began revisiting the content that had been available for years, now with a more critical and watchful eye. TikTok, in particular, became a platform for whistleblowing and discussion. Users began posting compilations of questionable moments, such as Ruby's harsh remarks to her children, public punishments, and the way she casually discussed disciplinary actions on camera. Videos showing visibly uncomfortable children sparked outrage and concern. What was once seen as educational content was now viewed by many as a warning sign. On Reddit, entire communities organized to gather evidence, transcribe old videos, and discuss the evolution of Ruby's behavior over the years. One of the most debated topics was the drastic tone shift in videos following the partnership with Jodi Hildebrand, and how that may have directly influenced the household dynamics. The couple's eldest daughter, Shari, was one of the first to speak out publicly. Now an adult and no longer living at home, she expressed concern for her younger siblings and stated that she had been trying to raise the alarm for. On her social media, Shari thanked those who reported the case and confirmed she was cooperating with it. Her statement was seen as a turning point. For the first time, someone from the family confirmed that something was indeed wrong. This stance brought even more visibility to the case and strengthened the public push for justice. Various news outlets began covering the story in depth, and experts were invited to discuss the limits of family discipline in media-exposed environments. Questions like, when does discipline become abuse? And is it ethical to monetize childhood? Dominated headlines and talk shows. Old videos resurfaced, including one where Ruby stated that if her children lied, they would lose basic privileges indefinitely. In another, she said she didn't trust any of the children until they showed constant virtue. These clips began being used as the basis for legal and psychological analyses of the environment in which the children were raised. Meanwhile, child protection agencies began re-evaluating their roles years prior. A report published in the media revealed that in 2020, a visit had been made to the Franke home following complaints, but no action was taken at the time. According to experts, this oversight may have prolonged the cycle of. The institutional failure also became the target of protests and public criticism. Brands that had once sponsored the channel issued statements, severing any ties with Ruby and condemning the situation. Some companies noted that while their partnerships occurred before the scandal, they did not condone any form of abuse and would review their influencer collaboration policy. From a family's perspective, the collapse was evident. The younger children were placed under temporary state custody while the court decided the best outcome for each of them. The 8 Passengers channel was demonetized and taken offline, abruptly ending a cycle that had lasted for years. Kevin Franke, once absent from the narrative spotlight, began making more conciliatory statements. He said he was in shock over the events and asked for privacy as he focused on emotionally supporting the children. Still, public opinion was divided. Some believed he had been negligent, while others saw him as a father trying to make amends. By this point, the public had developed a more critical awareness of the dangers of child exposure in digital environments. The Franke case had become not just a family tragedy, but a case study on the limits of digital influence, oversight failures, and the psychological impact on children who grew up in front of cameras. What remained was an atmosphere filled with difficult questions and few immediate answers. The legal process would continue, but the scars from years of exposure and controversial decisions were already engraved, not only on the Franke family, but on an entire generation of viewers who, for a long time, believed they were simply watching the life of an ordinary. The case of Ruby Franke is a powerful reminder that not everything that looks perfect online truly is. What began as a family channel, featuring everyday moments and parenting advice, ended as one of the most impactful scandals of the digital age, and perhaps the most emblematic of the dangers of child exposure online. Constant exposure, lack of boundaries, and the monetization of private life placed children in a vulnerable position, and also exposed the system's failure to protect them. More than an individual case, the Franke story raises urgent questions about the risks of digital influence, the limits of parental authority, and the role of the audience as active and responsible spectators. It is time to rethink what we consume online and how it can impact real lives, especially the most vulnerable ones. If you found this content relevant, subscribe to the channel, like the video, and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next announcement.